The Talking Points with the Training Center starts now.
Hello, thank you for joining the Talking Points with the Training Center. I'm Dan Kabuling, owner of IDT Training and lead strength and movement coach in the Training Center. I'm joined by Erik owner of Dub Baseball and the owner of the Training Center, along with Ryan Rosella, director of player development in the TC. Our topic of discussion today is constructing and developmental hitting environments. We are joined by two very special guests today to help us in this discussion. Tyger, if you want to go first and kind of just introduce yourself, give us your background, kind of your experience.
Yeah, definitely. I'm originally from Palo Alto, California. Played my college ball at University of Pacific and was drafted by the Los Angeles Dodgers in 2013. I played 4 years professionally before I got into coaching. Started my coaching career with Major League Baseball in Taiwan. After that stint, I coached at a D2, Hawaii Pacific University, and then moved on to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. In the summer, I managed in the California Collegiate League and in the Northwoods League. And then I started my coaching career professionally with St. Louis last year as a high A hitting coach. And then this year was slotted to be the Double-A hitting coach in Springfield. So yeah, that's a short snapshot of playing and coaching.
Awesome. Thank you. Chris, you want to kind of just give us your background, your experience?
Yeah. So grew up in Valencia, California. Went to UC Santa Barbara for college. Drafted by the Cincinnati Reds. Spent 7 years with them. Went to the Marlins for a year, and then finished my career with the Cubs. My last 2 years with the Cubs. Got some major league time up and down for 4 years, and got out of the game. Went back to school, finished my degree, coached at UCSB for a season, and then went and worked at Sparta Science, actually, up in the Bay Area by you guys. Worked there for about 10 months, and then baseball came calling me back. Was a rookie ball hitting coach in 17 with them. Jumped up to AAA after that the next season, and then got an opportunity to take over the department as the hitting coordinator the last 2 years.
Awesome. And I think you guys are both going to provide a ton of great content and as we kind of just dive into this constructing the developmental hitting environment. So the first talking point that we want to start off with is really, what is a constraints-led approach? What is the value of it? The type of constraints, environment. These are some things we'll dive into, and I kind of just bring it up as we go. But if you just want to kind of start with what is a constraints-led approach? Tyger, I know this is a big thing for you, so I'll have you kind of kick this one off.
Yeah, definitely. Using constraints to your benefit as a hitter individually, and the environment as a coach is definitely very beneficial. Some different, that we use and have seen used, plyo balls. I saw this first when I was working over at Stanford in the fall, but they really liked using the plyo balls, and Jack Martyr was one that kind of introduced me to it. But you can really see, if you're scoring it up, and if you're not, obviously you're going to get, the ball's just going to kind of dud or like kind of just spin off the barrel, but it really gets you to work like through the baseball. Overload, underload bats, again, constraints to kind of work on some bat speed. The heavy bat especially has been good just for, getting guys to use kind of their bigger muscles to swing the barrel or to swing the bat, and yeah, that's been one of the constraints that a lot of guys kind of take a liking to. Cleans up a lot of different things. So yeah, those are just a couple of the constraints that we use as far as like implements. But then you can definitely get into constraints on the field or in the cage, in the training environment. But yeah, we can dive into those a little bit later.
Cool. Chris, is there anything as far as kind of how you've applied this and how you use it?
No, I mean, to really kind of to echo Tyger, kind of same type of things, really just kind of creating that environment and the culture that, you want for these guys to have results in, as game-like or as, competitive as possible.
Yeah, I think kind of creating that environment, Ryan and Erik, if you guys want to talk kind of a few seconds with how you guys have done that in the TC. I think you guys, our other guests, deal with a little bit older population, and this is kind of a question I want to spin out to all of you guys. With these new implements, with something that's always new, I think with the younger crowd, the adoption is a little bit quicker and faster. Is that something you guys kind of seen in the training center versus your older players are like, well, why am I going to swing at these squishy balls? This is stupid. Like, why am I doing this? Is that something you guys have experienced in the TC?
Yeah, I mean, really, it kind of boils down to motor learning and understanding how the brain works. And if we're able as coaches kind of to provide them the environment where they're just going to learn through the constraint and through the task, then that's going to be the most valuable thing for them long term as we kind of develop young athletes. So, I mean, we've used a ton of stuff in the TC, and we have all the weighted bats, we have all the plow balls, and we use those regularly. I mean, even on the field, we very regularly in BP, we set up every net on pull side, and we tell them that if basically don't hit the net, no pull side ground balls and stuff like that, just to kind of give them some feel for and push them towards the task we want them to accomplish. So that's definitely kind of the base of how we teach hitting in the TC.
Yeah, and the constraints definitely can be a positive for us because we don't have to be there holding hands on players. We can give them more of an external focus with some of these constraints and allow them just to focus on doing that. A lot of that comes down to some self-organization, some different things on how their body works and how they can understand the movements. Obviously, we're always there to help and help them understand the how and the why of some of what's going on, but to give them that opportunity to utilize those constraints to make the adjustments on their own is really big for their own motor learning, like Erik was talking about, and giving them that opportunity to keep growing as players.
Chris, is that something with your more extensive experience as far as these new implements, these new methodologies are kind of being introduced, and maybe they're not new, maybe it's just like the new trick in the bag. Have you run into that issue as far as kind of that creating that culture of like, we're going to use these to make better hitters?
Yeah, I think it starts with like you said, the ethos of things, right? Like this is the direction we're going to go. We're going to use X, Y, and Z tools to get there. I would actually argue that a lot of our older guys kind of buy into a lot of that stuff because they're right at that point where they want to get that 1% better, where it gets them to the big leagues. Some guys might push back, like, why am I hitting a plyo ball, or why am I using a PVC pipe, or doing whatever it may be, because it's a little more foreign to them. But I think the adaptation for those guys comes a lot quicker than some of our lower level guys that, are still, like deer on ice. It takes them a little bit longer to make those adjustments, where our upper level guys, they have that ability already.
I think that's an awesome point, because I guess maybe that's the common theme between the young athlete and the older athlete is they're both in these positions of desperate for getting better.
Yeah. Where
maybe that athlete in the middle, it's like, I'm comfortable, like I've made it, I'm good, I'm like I've got this figured out. Tyger, have you run into that experience with some of the tools and things that you use?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Chris kind of nailed it, but creating that culture and that buy-in is definitely important. You get some of the older guys to buy in, and some of the guys that are the leaders or your top prospects, and then everybody kind of follows suit. So I think being able to create the culture and that environment that you want, and once you get a couple guys to buy in and get some results, and it kind of has that overall effect on a lot of other guys. So anyways, that's kind of what I've seen.
We're not gonna like mandate anything on anybody, like we're gonna put all of it out there, and if you want it, great. If not, it's your career at the end of the day. Like, you're the one that's gonna have to go take those at bats. Like, we're gonna lay out player plan, we're gonna lay out all the drills, all the constraints, we're gonna here's your plan, but at the end of the day, you're the one that ultimately gonna have to go and do it.
Is it easier for you guys to kind of coach a player coming through the system that's kind of used to these things already and kind of can walk right in the cage and kind of know what you're talking about?
I think having some familiarity with all those things, yeah, you're speaking a consistent language. I really think, with all of you guys that are coaching, it's how you connect with those players, and it's how you present the information to them and why it's important, and actually get them to buy in. I think that's probably the biggest sticking point is, them taking the ownership of their development.
And that's probably something, a piece that maybe gets glossed over is all these tools and all these new training methodologies, whatever it may be, are awesome. But if you don't have the ability as a coach to truly understand them and kind of boil it down and be able to literally explain it to a child, then they're probably not going to listen to you as a coach. Because it's like, I think most athletes, we all have experienced this, you can kind of tell when somebody doesn't really know what they're talking about. When they're like, oh, we're just going to do this today, and it's kind of just flippant. I've seen this with other coaches in other scenarios where it's like you get kind of like that new toy and it shows up for like a week or two and then all of a sudden it's gone. You're like, oh, I thought this was like a mainstay, which is a big difference that we're trying to do at the training center. Is like, no, these tools are part of your day in, day out development, and you're going to learn to master them, and then we're going to hold them to actually, making you better. It's not just a gimmick in the cage to get you to pay, $50 for the hour of my time. So let's dive kind of a little bit into the environments. Is there any other like environmental type constraints that you guys use? And I know Erik kind of talks about like the netting and giving guys focus and saying, okay, we're not going to hit ground balls to the pull side. Anything that you guys like to use, or is kind of like your go-to?
Go-to, I think it really, we try to bucket guys as much as we can based on, movement profiles, their profile as, their path to the major leagues. So, I think with some of those environments, especially in like a instructional league or a hitting camp, we'll have guys doing certain types of work, not spring training. It's a crapshoot. It's herding cats at that point and just trying to get your hands on as many people as you can. But I probably don't have a great answer to like specific ones we go to, but trying to tailor to each individual player in their bucket.
Yeah, I think just to kind of echo that, during your hitting camps and instructional leagues, you can get a little bit more specific with guys, and it's definitely an individualized plan as far as player development and what constraints and what tools and different pieces of tech that you're going to implement for each guy. But yeah, during spring training, it's definitely a little bit more challenging. You have a ton of guys that you're trying to get reps in and kind of see. And then during the season, you have your specific times, for early work where, maybe you're implementing some different constraints and tools, or setting up BP a certain way. But, it's always a balancing act between, managing your individualized plan and then kind of like your overall team plan and what that looks like with your 12 to 13 hitters. So I think that's kind of where, your coaching feel kind of comes into play. Like, all right, what do these guys need today? Let's, give them something good for the team, maybe something challenging, some type of competition. But at the same time, like, all right, how do we kind of individualize that and where does that kind of come into play? So it's definitely a good balancing act as far as how you create that environment.
I think that's a great word you use too, balance, especially during the season with, what are we valuing? Are we valuing, the practice part of it? Because at some point, we are at like the lower levels, with them, developing those skills, but we also have to be, cognizant that at 7 o'clock, the bell rings every night and competition is the only thing that matters, not, our Rapsodo, the consistency of our contact. Like, no, we got to like move a runner. We got to get a guy in from third. We got to do all the little things that win games. So, it's finding that balance where, what are we actually valuing at this level?
And that was, I think,
one question I got for you guys both is, I know that you guys kind of mentioned like the hecticness of spring training. When you guys got into the seasons, were you guys able to work really individually with players and kind of utilize those buckets like Chris was talking about? Or was it something where you were kind of still having so many guys at so many different points and putting so many different focuses that you would just more of have that team focus and kind of then be able to individualize as you talk to guys?
I think on the individual stuff, like you really value, and I'm sure Tyger will say the same, like you value cage flow, like you do the work as a coach, preparing, your plan for each player, setting up early work, whatever, and as the season progresses, that starts getting looser because, people just normally come at like a certain time, you still have your plan. So there is some individualization, but then once you get into like a BP setting, it's more of the team or the culture of, how we're going to attack that pitcher or, the focus of what we're trying to accomplish.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that, Chris kind of nailed it, but sorry, we got the dog barking in the background here. But anyways, yeah, no, Chris kind of nailed it. Definitely the balance is important. Yeah. Sorry.
Awesome.
No, that's fine. This is something, individualization is probably the biggest thing that we've been talking about for the last, I don't even know, year and a half, 2 years of, okay, how do we meet the needs of every individual, but balanced with kids care about winning games, and we need to make good baseball players, but how can we, in a team setting, especially when you have, let alone, you said, I think you said herding cats, like it's you get 15, 12-year-olds in a facility, is controlled chaos, is like not even a nice way of putting it. And so like those buckets that you were talking about, Chris, we've been discussing this and some debating on what are the buckets that we need to focus on. If you can, like, what are those individual aspects that you guys look towards and kind of train towards?
Sure. Like in a, I guess like an instructional league or a, hitting camp setting, we can get as granular as we want depending on the personnel that we have there. Starting with like a movement profile, we'll put like looser movers together, we'll put stiffer movers together, because we're not going to train them the same way, in that type of setting. If we're in more of like a spring training type setting, then it becomes more like culturally focused, with what we're trying to accomplish in those buckets. As well as, like I said, the player's trajectory to the big leagues. Like, we're not going to have some of our burners or our low impact guys trying to elevate the ball. And on the flip side, with the guys that we need to get the ball in the air, we're going to value, like you said, nets on the left side of the field. Like we're trying to elevate the ball and do things like that. So, just based on the whole holistic approach, that's kind of how we bucket our guys.
Tyger, is there kind of your go-to, like, I'm gonna categorize hitters with this way, and then that allows me to individualize to their needs?
For sure, yeah. We definitely take a look at individualization and working with, like Chris had mentioned, movement profiles, and just working well with our strength and conditioning staff and athletic trainers, and kind of like how guys are moving and how they need to be working, and then along with, the mental skills coach, and just trying to combine like everybody's different specialties, working on one common goal to develop your hitter, the best way you can. And then you've got, your hitting coach for, some of your swing skills type things, maybe mechanics based, approach based, different things like that. But, during the season, at least for me last year, going through, my first year with the Cardinals, you definitely, have to take some time to build those relationships and that trust with the players. And that takes some time, So for me, I think probably the first month or 2 months, it was just kind of getting to know the guys, like what works well for them, how they had success in the past, what's their routine, what drills, cues do they like, how do they learn best, how do they want their feedback, how to make that loop, pretty tight from myself getting back to them, whether, we're implementing technology or video or whatever the case may be. And then, after the first couple of months, it started, you started clicking, and it's like, okay, we've got the trust, we've got the relationship. And then that's when it's like, okay, as a coach, I was able to be prepared with the information. So when players came to me, it's like, okay, now I've got some good stuff for you. Okay, now let's roll. But that process definitely took some time. I think it's really just about learning your guys and like really getting to know them as people. I'm sure we've all kind of been there where you lose a kid because you kind of try to jump in too quick. And it's great, you have this awesome individualized program for them, and you're like, oh, I got all this good stuff for you, like this is what we need to do, boom, 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 boom. And it's like, oh, but the timing wasn't right. Like, oh, the relationship wasn't there. And then you lose a kid, and it's like, man, now we're like, swimming uphill trying to figure that out. So I definitely think, the timing of having those individualized plans and when it comes is super important. And, every kid and every player development plan, there's, context of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish is important. Maybe it's off-season swing change where you got to get them outside of a competitive environment, or maybe it's something like a little small tweak that you can get accomplished in a in a minor league season. And it's like, all right, we're just going to do, some small like maintenance type stuff. So you just kind of got to be aware of like what your timing is. And obviously with instructional leagues and, off seasons, you have a little bit more time and less competitive environment where you can kind of do some cool stuff. So it really depends on a lot of different factors.
You get one bullet too, it's like the timing of it. And, Andy Haynes has been a mentor of mine, and he talks about how you prepare for months for a 2-minute conversation, and you're sitting there waiting, for that right time to like set the hook with the guy when he needs you, when he comes to you. Now you've got him instead of, we all have great information, all the tools we have, we're all, we want to jump in and do the best for the player, but, sometimes you got to let them go before they, you can get them back and really, get them to buy into what they're doing, then jumping in. That was a message I had for our coaches this year, was like, man, you all have the job. We're all in this together. We just, wait, timing is huge. We get one bullet with these guys, build relationships first. So then we have them the whole season, because to your point, you lose somebody, now it becomes a grind the whole year,
And that's probably something that, sorry, go ahead. I would say that's probably something that we are fortunate to have, where players seek us out. That they're looking for a team to play on. They're looking for a coach to hit with. They're looking for a strength coach to get into the gym and get bigger and stronger. So they're already open to some of the stuff that we have to say, and then we can add that assessment and individualization component. Say, hey, here's how we're going to help you as an individual, and I think that also shows a level of, okay, here's how we care. Because sometimes in the team setting, you get lost. You have players that are like, oh, coach hates me, he doesn't play me at all. It's like, no, it's just right now with the way the team is, you're just not getting ABs, you're not getting in the game. Or with in practice where a coach is working with you, and there's the players that are literally doing everything right, so you never say anything to them. And then they think, oh, coach hates me, he never talks to me at practice, never gives me any instruction. Kids process, and people process attention as care and love. So I think this entire process is we're pretty fortunate with the setup we have at the TC.
Dan, to kind of go with what you were talking about, one of the things that you mentioned was that idea of kids who think that we don't care because we aren't giving them as much attention. I feel like that's a great one to kind of, talk about as well, because a lot of the times those kids, you don't want to overcoach them. They're doing something so well that it's, like if I go in there and I want to overcoach them, they might all of a sudden get into bad habits. They might get into their head about something. Their approach might change. So that's a great point, I think, as well, is just remembering, and it kind of goes back to what Chris and Tyger were both saying, is you do have one chance to kind of connect with them, where if you have that relationship built, then you have that ability to make those changes, or to basically just sit there and be quiet and let them kind of figure things out on their own and what they can do with it.
Yeah, there's like a million things off this little nugget right here that I want to dive into, but we have the last 6 months, 8 months, as we kind of prepared for this group of athletes who are coming in, hopefully in the summer, we'll see, but hopefully this summer, we've been diving into an assessment to help individualize to their needs. Brian and Erik, do you guys want to kind of dive into some of the buckets that you guys are using with hitters?
Yeah, we've we kind of put our heads together and actually consulted Tyger a little bit on this too, as far as like how we're going to group hitters this summer. And we're going to have a high volume, probably at least 60 in this program. Maybe even more if the minor league season and the collegiate summer leagues kind of keep shutting down. But we've kind of come up with 5 groups that we're going to bucket in this summer, and within that we can individualize, of course, within those buckets. But kind of the big ones we're going after are time to contact, so guys that are really slow on the K-vest, going after that, high attack angle, low attack angle. Those are a couple that we definitely want to focus on. Bat speed group, so guys that just either just really need a boost in their bat speed to even get to a functional level, or maybe they're in a really good spot and 2-3 miles per hour on their bat speed can kind of really take them to the next level. And then that 5th group is just the challenge or maintenance group, guys that are in a really good place with their numbers and their swing. And it's just all about kind of creating a cool environment to kind of challenge them and stimulate them and make sure they stay where they are.
Yeah, and the challenge group, I think, is one of those ones that kind of goes back to that previous point about guys that we don't want to overcoach, the guys that are just going to be challenged by the environment, by some of those constraints and being tested. Those are the guys that we feel like have an opportunity to really make some big jumps, once they get to the college level or as they're getting into the college level, and keep going from there. Some of those other ones, we've obviously put a lot of their focus from our technology standpoint, from our K-Vest, from the Blast, from hit tracks, to kind of gain as much data as we could about them and give us a good plan moving forward. Obviously, I think one of those ones that Chris mentioned is movers is a big one, where having Dan in-house is helpful to know, some of those movement profiles that are going on with guys and give us a little bit better understanding of different situations.
Do you guys, as far as some of those buckets that Erik kind of broke down, do you guys have any, I guess, feedback on, hey, like, that is an area definitely you should focus on, especially with the younger athletes, because that's one of the areas that we clean up right away. Like if somebody comes into the minor league system and we're like, oh, yep, that's easy, we're going to fix that and we're going to start theirs. Any feedback on those buckets?
I think depending on your population, I think the buckets are probably stay pretty fluid, I would assume, for you guys, like as those guys get older to the like college, professional type ranks, the ability to impact the ball is, immensely important. So I think that's one, with however you want to go about that, be it bat speed or, like movement type, like posting or what you need to do to create that. But I think that's a big one, at least for us at the pro level, that if you don't hit the ball hard, you're not going to advance through the levels. That's like a baseline foundation for us that, at up until Double-A, your biggest goal is to hit the ball hard.
Tyger, and anything for you as far as, I know we've already kind of had this conversation a little bit, but any feedback on those categorizations?
No, I think Chris echoed it and said it well. And I'm just going to say the same thing, but you got to be able to hit the ball hard and impact the baseball. So that's definitely, a major key. And like you kind of mentioned, we've talked a lot through it on some of the other buckets. But yeah, you guys are definitely in a good spot.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway that I got from ARC Talk a little while back was like, all these buckets are awesome. And Chris, you kind of talked about this too. All of this training and individualization, all this is awesome. But if it doesn't actually make us better in games, then none of it matters. So I think that was kind of Tyger, a big takeaway where I personally, as the strength coach, I'm a numbers guy, right? I kind of get stuck in the numbers world where all that matters is more on your deadlift or more on this or more on that. And so it's like, oh, well, more is better. And it's like, well, no. Like what matters is actually making good ball players. And I think, I want to transition into kind of the tech that we're using, but I think the tech as a whole is getting kind of, you have this, like, it is a polarizing type topic, but I think the message we as a coaches are trying to get across, and you guys, if you want to give us some feedback on this, is the tech is only there for us, not only to assess, but also to hold us accountable to actually making you better. I think that's probably a big piece. So I think a huge advantage that Erik has given to Ryan and I as coaches is, we have K-Vest, we have Blast, we have hit tracks, we have vision training, we do video analysis. We're trying to basically create a pro level experience for youth players. Is there any pieces of tech that you guys kind of lean on and really enjoy using and have seen it being helpful to actually develop players?
Yeah, Tyger, do you want to take that one? I mean, I can lead in. I think we're fortunate to have so many pieces of technology, and I think that question can go a lot of different directions because there's different pieces that are more valuable for different types of players. Like if we're focusing on an attack angle or getting the ball in the air, we're gonna really lean on probably some of the blast type stuff, or dig in with K-Vest, with their bends and stuff like that. But I think it's really case by case. I wouldn't say there's like one thing that we really dig in, like this is our always go to, because there's so many different scenarios for everything.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think that it's all based on your player and how you're going to utilize it best. The one thing that I would say from a coaching standpoint is it definitely holds your coaches accountable. Just the kids now, they have so much education and prior knowledge using the tech. So they come in with this understanding where, as a coach, it's like they're quick to fact check you and, hey, whatever, and call you out. So as a coach, it definitely holds you accountable. And, you see both sides where it's like, oh, like he's not really using it, in the best way. And then kind of like, that's your one bullet, right? That's your one shot that Chris was talking about. Like, and if you get exposed, then it's like, okay, well, that kind of hurts your credibility. Whereas, you know, on the flip side of it, it's like, okay, if you stay ahead of the tech, and there's like, you know, so much different technology out there, like Chris mentioned, and as you guys know, but if you kind of stay ahead of it and you have that understanding and that, you know, that experience using it, then when somebody asks, or you're working with a player that has like a deep knowledge of it, say a college guy from like a top university, they have every single piece of tech out there, then it's like, okay, you can connect with that guy. And that's the key, I think. So I think from the coaching standpoint, like having that understanding and knowing, you know, enough about everything, where, you know, obviously you're not going to be an expert in everything, especially as it's new, but to have a conversation with a kid and like has something to say, it's like, okay, here we go. Now it creates that relationship, and, you know, you kind of get that buy-in, and anything to help player buy-in, I think is huge. So, you know, everybody likes different kinds of tech, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the player buy-in and, you know, getting them to kind of do what, you know, the organization wants them to do and what you want them to do as a hitting coach. So
The
I got a question
technology
for you
really
guys
helps
both.
validate everything that we do as well. You know, it validates the coach's eye, it validates the feels that the player has. You know, I think, you know, between those two things and then having the actual data to reinforce it, you know, it's like we're not guessing, you know, not that, you know, baseball's been around for hundreds of years. Like, we haven't been guessing then either, but, you know, now there's actually like hard numbers to quantify the things that like we actually see on a day-to-day basis.
I got a question for both you guys. So I've just been finishing up the book Swing Kings. And so obviously a lot of guys have gone through this change where they've been working with so many different, at least hitting coaches, guys outside of the organizations. Is that something that you guys feel like, with your ability to utilize technology and data and all this new stuff now, has that made it harder or easier for you guys to kind of connect with guys who are working with different hitting coaches outside of the season once they come back to the season?
I know in my position, I try to have a relationship with as many people, you know where those guys are going, and be able to just to touch base with those guys and keep in contact with the player and as well as like the facility with some of those dudes. You know, I think that keeps like the loop closed, you know, that you know where they're going, there's trust, we're speaking the same language, regardless if it's, you know, with us during the season or with somebody else in the off season. You know, I think where some of that stuff can get a little muddy is when the season starts and games matter, you know, because now it's production and posting and, you know, like you got to put up, and it's not about, you know, a controlled like vacuum of like a facility type or a cage setting in pro ball, you know?
yeah, that's awesome. I think it's really important to create those relationships. And the players, you know, in the off season, they're going to go where they're going to go. So if you have an understanding of what's being taught and a relationship with that instructor, I think that's huge. The past couple off seasons, I've been lucky enough to study with some good guys down in Southern California that work with a lot of players, and I've just been, you know, fortunate where you run into that player and you're like, oh yeah, I know you worked with Craig or Doug or, you know, Eugene or whoever, and it's like, okay, now you have that instant like bond. So now the relationship's really strong, and then player trusts you, and then that feedback loop like is a lot tighter. And it's just easier to get on the same page when you know what that instructor wants to teach. Everybody's kind of got their own style, and you know, like once you kind of have an understanding of like what that style is, then you can kind of help that guy through some of those trials and different things throughout the season. So that helped me a lot last year. And we had a lot of California kids, you know, on my team last year. And so a lot of those guys hit with the guys down in SoCal. So that was just a nice transition.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that question up is one of the areas that we're trying to build up in this area is that connection between like the club programs or the travel teams and the high schools, because we feel like there can be sometimes a disconnect as we get into that, where guys have been working with us and then all of a sudden their high school coaches are telling them a little bit different or different situations. So that was awesome to hear from both of you guys. Thank you.
So we've been kind of have a theme of this balancing component, and we've been trying to tip the balance of what we're doing in the training center from heavily assessing. We've done, I think we've gotten to the point where we're very comfortable in the ability to assess the hitters that come through the facility. But we want to start using the technology and us as coaches and the environment and all these tools to actually develop. I guess, Tyger, if you want to kind of dive into this as far as what are the ways that you kind of utilize and leverage some of these tools to actually make impact on players?
Yeah, I mean, each piece of technology is different. So to go into each one, it would, obviously take a long time. But I think that there's definitely lots of different ways in which it can be beneficial when you start looking at, actually getting guys better. I would say the number one thing, and that I would like, from a movement standpoint, is just watching the video and breaking down the video. I think that's going to be, the ability to make your biggest changes. And really, help guys get better. Like we kind of touched on before, the technology is definitely a measurement to kind of, quantify some of those things that you're looking for, and kind of hold yourself accountable as a coach, and then, kind of get the players to like understand where they're at. But yeah, the video doesn't lie. And that's definitely a good way to kind of track your progress. And, we kind of talked about it on our last call, but, being able to, have an assessment where you're starting out and then, okay, here we are now, and then just kind of blending your drill or feel or whatever the case may be with that video. And is it working? Okay, great. It's not working. Okay, we got to regress and go back into more of a controlled environment, and kind of going through that, that process of progression and regression, and pairing it with the video so that you can see really what's going on. And obviously you have other pieces of technology as well that you can, use to hold guys accountable and measure. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Chris, is your, I mean, if I want to kind of spin this question just a little bit for you, where, from a development standpoint, if we can, maybe speak a little more to the youth side of things, you look at the average high school baseball player as a hitter, what would you say? Okay, hey, this is the area that you need to develop and you need to get better at if you want to have a shot at playing as many games as possible in your career.
From a physical standpoint, I think, we all know mass matters. So, just overall physical strength for those guys, really focusing on that is going to help them, sustain the grind of a minor league season or major league season. And I think some of those undersized guys, their mechanics, they mimic their mass, right? So some of those like lighter guys fire from the top, right? They're trying to create bat speed. They're trying to do more, get more out of their frame. So, as far as a development standpoint, at least for us, our lower levels are just focused on, adding size, adding mass, hitting the ball hard. And then as we progress, we're going to start, polishing that stone with, whatever you're profiling as, if we need to get the ball in the air more, if you need to get on base more, prioritize contact, whatever that may be. But at least for our guys that are just cracking in, for high school guys, our biggest focus for them is adding size.
Erik, I feel like we're probably, getting to be able to say that I told you so, because this is kind of obviously becoming a theme for the conversations we've had with some other minor leaguers and other coaches. And it's a big one for you. Like, I feel like your message is always get good enough.
Yeah, for sure. And, they both said it perfectly. And hopefully some of our players and families listen to this. I think, a big issue at the younger ages, but particularly in high school, as they start to think about getting recruited for colleges and stuff like that, is they get caught between kind of, being a man and a boy, and physically and mentally, we preach to them constantly to get bigger and stronger, particularly the guys that aren't big and strong. So if they're not big and strong, they kind of have to check their ego a little bit, and parents got to kind of put their bias away and just say, like, okay, like, yes, this is a weakness. And it's hard for a lot of young players and for parents to kind of admit that their kid has a weakness. And so they kind of get caught there in between those two worlds. It needs to happen. But, obviously we have some high level hitting coaches on here. And then we know as coaches that, like, hey, yes, you're going to have to swing the bat this hard, and yes, your exit velocity is going to have to be here if you're going to play at the upper levels, and there's no way around it. And kind of the thing I always say is that, try to be the rule. Don't try to be the outlier. Like try to get to where the group is. Don't depend on, maybe they'll notice me anyway, because it's a really tough way to make it.
Yeah, I think, you hit the nail on the head too. And just something to add, like time for all of us, like for the younger guys in development and then pro ball, there is some urgency, but like you put a pizza in the oven for 15 minutes, it's done in 15 minutes. We're not going to have it be done in 12 minutes, like it takes time and this evolution of all of this. Like you're not going to get to rookie ball at 180 pounds and then think you're going to go to the big leagues the next year. Like maybe some guys do, but there is some component of, we need to be patient as an industry getting these guys, to where they need to be.
I think this we've been definitely talking about. Sorry, Ryan, do you have something you
No,
want
go
to
ahead. I thought Chris's analogy with putting the pizza in the oven was a good one. I had to write down.
Yeah. I think it's especially on the youth side of things, it's the instant gratification. Like I want to be a big leaguer right now. Mm-hmm. I'm 6. We have Erik has some players in his program. They're 12, 13, 14 years old, and they're 6'4", 6'5". It's like you are a man's body, but you have a 12-year-old's body control. Like I think, and then you have the pressure from the parents. You have the pressure from the game. You have the pressure from all these different areas that are affecting that athlete's mentality and their ability to produce. So I think we've been definitely talking about a lot of the building blocks. And Ryan, I know this is a big one for you. We've been talking about the building blocks of a good athlete, a good player, a good hitter. I think the next level, and the part that, again, why we're so excited, Erik and I, to have Ryan as part of our staff, is building adaptable and consistent hitters. Chris, if you want to kind of dive into this and just, okay, what does it mean to be adaptable? And then where do you look for consistency? What metrics do you use? How do you even measure and define that?
Sure. I mean, adaptable, I think, is the name of our game, right? We're not pitchers. We don't control the ball. We're reactionary all the time. So, we need to be in that position knowing that. I think a lot of the stuff, if we're going to talk about adjustability, that goes through development, knowing and setting expectations at the lower levels, or even, in youth baseball, that, there's going to probably be more swing and miss as they're developing, their plan or their approach, and really kind of figuring out who they are. As far as consistency, I think that really matters more as you go up the levels, because production starts to matter, at the lower levels. And you guys work in a very tough industry as well, with, the youth players that are trying to get drafted or go to college. They're trying to put up numbers. So it's almost like a high level, professional, where like numbers at the end of the day matter, not your K-vest reading or your launch angle or your, consistency of contact, because at the end of the day, like, can we trust you? Can you get to the big leagues and help the team win? So I don't know if I did a good job explaining that, but that's kind of the way we go through, like, level by level progressions with our guys.
Tyger, do you have any as far as kind of developing that adaptable hitter, and like how do you define that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is the name of the game. Adjustability is key. We're facing pitchers now that are better than ever. With pitch design and tunneling, it's obviously a really challenging time to be a hitter, and you have to be able to, get an efficient position and then be able to get off consistent swings and be able to, adjust to that late break. If you want to have a chance to play at a high level. And then, like Chris said, as you're moving up from, lower levels of the minor leagues to upper levels, like, consistency is definitely a big key factor in that. And I think it kind of all wraps around, your swing decisions and being able to, take that tough 1-1 pitch in the dirt, to get to that 2-1 pitch. And now you're in a better count where you can do some damage. So, the ability to make swing decisions and have late takes, get yourself in positive counts so you can, do some damage, I think is really, really key. Key parts of the consistency. Obviously, it's a little bit different than, the swing component, but definitely a very important piece to creating that consistency that you're talking about. So
I think both parts too, and I just wrote this down, it popped in my head, but the overarching theme for us is like the ability to hit off time, right? We can all get our A swing off when it's perfect, but the hitters that get to the big leagues, the hitters that play for a long time, all can hit off time when it's not perfect.
That's a great one, Chris. I think that's a big one that young kids don't recognize as much, or it isn't as important to them. They think that every swing is going to be an A swing. And getting them to understand that there's times where you are beat, like there's times where you're off in your timing, there's times where your load's long, or there's something that happened, and you still got to compete. And I think that's one of the ones that's really interesting about the consistency piece. Even Tyger was kind of bringing that up, is so many of our kids not really understanding their approaches yet, trying to adapt to their approaches as they grow and as they find things. The one that Tyger said about finding that 1-1 pitch and taking it to get to that positive count. Those little things are the things that I think is what changes those young hitters from being good to great, is being able to understand those little things and adapting those into their swing, to understand that, if we give ourselves the most amount of time to see the ball and to adjust to it, it gives us our best chance to make as much contact as we possibly can. We have all seen, the game of baseball has had an increase in strikeouts because of how good these pitchers are. And it's not, anything as hitters to shy away from. I think if anything, it's more of just absorbing that and then understanding, like, okay, we know these guys are going to come at us with really good stuff. Like, we just got to be consistent in what we're looking for and how we approach it. And that's kind of my thoughts with this entire idea of adaptability and consistency with guys.
I think this is when we sat down for one of the assessments with one of the dub players, I think this side of things, if you want to separate yourself, like you have this kind of, again, balance. We need physical development. We need to be bigger, stronger. We need to be faster. I think the other side of it, if you want to make inroads and really want to take yourself to the next level, baseball IQ is an area that is like massively under trained, undersold on right now, where you have a lot of like freak athletes that have no clue how to play the game of baseball. So if you want to separate yourself, no matter what level you're at, your ability to do some of these little things that you guys are talking about, especially as a hitter, you'll find your way into the lineup more often. And you might not be the biggest, stronger, faster guy, but you're the guy that consistently goes out and produces. And I think that is a piece that we are trying to balance as the training center. Okay, we want to train athletes and build athletes and develop them, but we still need to balance that with okay, you need to go out and actually help your team win. Like, it's great that we could post a kid's exit velo being 100 miles an hour, but if he's going out and striking out every 2 or 3 at bats, his high school coach is like, screw you guys, I'm not this kid's not any better. Like, he did that last year and he's doing it again. Like, that's not helping anybody. So
I can jump in there, Dan. Just a huge focus of ours, probably about the past half year or so, has just been implementing decision making in the hitting environment as much as possible. The kids don't like it because they're not in there swinging, but I think the variance in pro ball is about 39 to 54% of the pitches that a hitter actually swings at. So why are we in a cage environment where they're swinging 95% of the time? So we've really tried to kind of adjust each of our stations or drills to kind of make sure that they're making a decision. And it's sometimes as simple as like, hey, like, you can swing at the blue plyos and take the white ones. So at least they have to have some kind of a mental engagement and make a decision with every one of their swings. Something that they really hate that I do is I'll put the slider machine at the bottom of the zone. And then, if they take a slider down, we say good, we praise them. So I think, just simple things like that can create the right environment, and that'll really kind of create hitters that adjust and are consistent in their approach and make better decisions. Because, when you boil down to it, I mean, hitters have to make decisions every pitch in milliseconds. So I think it's super important area of this kind of point we're talking about.
I think that's a huge point for us, and I think you nailed it. It takes the emphasis off of the result and puts it back on the process, because we all played, right? We've all looked up and you look at the board and you're hitting, 210, like, oh my God, your ego is so tied to that, that, for us reinforcing our players, you work through an at bat, the next day we give them kind of like an after action report, and it's like, your decision making was spot on. You went 0 for 4 and you grounded out and you lined out, but you swung at the right pitches. You took the right pitches. Like, yesterday was a win outside of, your line result, but like over the course of the season, that's going to balance out. The more positive decisions you make, at the end of the year, as your career evolves, like, those are all quality things that you're going to do in your development.
So I guess the next piece that I want to ask, and maybe this is me being a little bit selfish, but we've been talking about and profiling different hitters, and it's kind of given us themes from a movement standpoint. I know one of the big terms right now is kind of the loose mover versus the tight mover. It's been kind of big on Twitter and on Instagram and social media and et cetera. Is that something you guys have, you deal with? Like, how do you coach those athletes differently? Are there any tendencies that you see with the loose mover versus the tighter mover? Tyger, is that something you kind of encounter on a day-to-day basis?
I wouldn't say on a day-to-day basis, but we have our 12 to 13 hitters. Chris will probably be able to touch on it more. He's working with 100+ hitters in his organization, but we have our 12 or 13 guys. We run them through FMS testing, and our strength staff and training staff does a great job of outlining what those limitations may be, and we come up with a plan for each guy, individualized, and they've got their pre-game prep and stuff that they do in the in the training room, and then they take it into the weight room, and they've got some more drills and exercises that they do that all is going to help them when they get into the cage and we start doing cage type stuff. So everybody just does a good job to work together, and everybody's got their individualized program, and then we just rock and roll.
Chris, is this something that we talked to really early, the kind of the buckets? Is this one of the buckets that you guys utilize?
Yeah, absolutely. At I guess the most basic level, it creates our baseline for these guys. Having a neutral mover, a tighter mover, a looser mover. At least for us, managing expectations. Number one, we're talking about decision making, knowing that some of these looser movers, it's going to take them a lot more time to get to contact. So probably our bigger, longer limbed guys, more swing and miss, especially at the top of the zone, like managing our expectations with that. And then as well as, the tighter mover guys, they can back the ball up even further. Their decisions are later because they can get up to full speed quicker. So, kind of knowing that profile. And then as far as like the training component of it, we do our movement screen, we get all of that stuff. And then we want to have them in like a safe range. And we're working with like strength and conditioning and ATCs on that stuff. On both ends of the spectrum, too loose, you have, the ability to like obliques, same side on the, the tighter mover side too, right? So just safety, number one. And then we're also not going to give the drill sets because majority of the time those looser movers are higher impact guys, because all that momentum coming. So, those guys are more of the elevate, but really susceptible to the ball at the top of the zone. So understanding that, trying to get them to manage the top of the zone, then actually like hit that, it's like decision making to take, or can you foul that off and earn yourself another pitch? That's kind of the approach we go with those guys. And the tighter movers, exit velocity tends to be, I don't want to speak in broad strokes, but a little lower than those bigger mover guys. Not that it's a bad thing, but those are more like the high contact, quicker time to impact guys. So really train them in those constraints.
I think that this is one, at least maybe me personally, but kind of just seeing a lot of coaches talk about, maybe debate and argue is probably more appropriate. But I think what I'm taking away from you, Chris, is there is no good or bad. It is what you are, and we're going to do our best job to coach you.
Yeah, be the best you. I think it's irresponsible for us to try to profile somebody into a lane or into a bucket that they can't physically do. And especially in pro ball, like our window is so small that like we have to be spot on because we have these guys' careers in our hands. Like if we're just guessing and throwing stuff against the wall, like that's really unfortunate for these people that buy in, and we've led them down the wrong path. So, like we have that responsibility as coaches, all of us do at whatever level we're working at.
Well, I think that was very appropriate in timing of kind of some of the conversations that have been coming out, just because I think people have a little extra free time and idle hands can lead to bad tweets. So this next area, I think it's perfect timing with some of the things that we're doing within the Dub organization. Ryan put together an awesome challenge, and I really sucked at it. We call it the Game Sense Challenge, where your pitch recognition. You had 4 pitchers you go to, you could get about up to 1,000 points. I got to about 495 points, so absolutely failing at the challenge. But mental / vision training, probably maybe a little bit more biased towards that vision training. Chris, is that something you guys have been utilizing and something that you trained with?
Yeah, we do. We use, I'm not sure how proprietary, we use a company called Neuro Scouting. So we do vision training with all of our affiliates. All of our guys go through it daily. And then trying to get into more of, I think the VR is really our next step for this stuff. And then going back to like the bucket things, I think there's a lot of growth that we can have there. Training our players based on their movement profiles and all the technologies that we have. Your time to impact is slow. So, you need to make your decision so much further out front that, we need to train in that area. We're not going to train everybody the same way in a vision training or something like that. Like, you need to get comfortable way out there to make your decisions. And we should manage and track that out that way, like through occlusion or whatever it may be. Compared to some of those like tighter movers or quick time to impact guys, they can make their decisions later. So let's train them in those parameters.
Cool. I guess tying it all together, like even individualizing from the vision standpoint, where if you have a quicker time to contact, we might need to adjust what vision training that we're actually doing with you, because you don't need to you can make a decision in less time. So we can challenge you differently.
Absolutely.
Tyger, do you have any experience with vision training? Is there any apps, tech, whatever you guys you utilize?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're starting to kind of get into more of the virtual reality. I know at the big league level, Goldschmidt he really likes it. My brother plays with the Dodgers, and he's a big advocate, along with Cody Bellinger. We were teammates early on in rookie ball, and he's been a guy who's like, he takes a lot of time with it. I think it's a little different for each person, but if you can create that value and it works within your routine, then more benefit to you. But I think that's kind of like the next kind of phase of like where things are going. And there's definitely value there. I think another component of it is just like having an idea when you're game planning of, the pitch profile and like how guys' pitches move and what he's got. And so as you have an idea of like what that is and pairing it with video, then you can kind of really start coming up with your offensive game plan for, your team, and then specifically like each individual hitter, and, kind of match up like, okay, what does this hitter do well versus how this pitcher's going to pitch him. And now we come up with like an individualized plan for that guy. But it all kind of ties into your game planning. And at the end of the day, like as we get to higher levels of baseball, it comes down to what's actually, the production that's going on. So I think the virtual reality of vision training tied in with like understanding like what the pitcher's profile is and what he can do with the ball, and then what you do as a hitter, kind of all ties into like, okay, here's our game plan, and we need to go out and execute. So it all ties into each other.
Chris, I want to bring up something. Obviously, you guys were kind of in the forefront in mental skills with Ken, and obviously with John now being in kind of charge of that. For both you and Tyger, maybe the question is mental stuff obviously kind of goes to what Tyger was just talking about and understanding pitchers, but also kind of understanding yourself. How have you guys kind of utilized some of that mental stuff to help guys off the field as well as on the field?
I mean, we have as much of an emphasis on the mental skills as we do in any other, silo of their development. I think we kind of talked about it earlier. These guys that can kind of rein that stuff in earlier, tend to be the guys that advance quicker, get to the big leagues. They have more of that mental fortitude than some of these guys. And you see it with maturity, compared to like a high school draft pick versus a college draft pick, guys that have a little more salt on them. But, it's been a huge thing, not just for players, but also for coaches. Like we lay in bed staring at the ceiling just as much as these guys do when they're struggling. Like they might take 4 at bats, but we take 40 a night, and that like we grind on that stuff. So being able to have a resource for us to kind of bounce things off, and Tyger talked about it earlier, understanding and using them as a medium of how these guys learn, how they take in information, because we're not going to coach, one way. You have 13 hitters at an affiliate, you're going to coach them 13, you're going to put on 13 hats that day. And it's all how, you need to connect with those guys. And I think mental skills is a really good conduit for that.
For the youth player, and I guess I'm gonna be the kind of keep reining it back to this again, maybe me being selfish, but for the younger players out there, do you guys have any words of advice from this mental training standpoint? Because we'll talk about this a lot, where and we've all done it. You and Chris, you alluded to it earlier. We attribute our value and worth to how we were playing as a baseball player, and I think. Again, balance. We're trying to balance with, okay, yes, those things do matter, but we're going to use these different metrics and tools and assessments to say, hey, yeah, you went 0 for 4 over the weekend, but you as a hitter, it wasn't bad. You're the same guy. You just didn't get the outcome you wanted. Your process was awesome. So let's continue that consistency. But do you guys have any words of advice to that young player that is looking to kind of get that mental edge?
I definitely do. Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, all right. I'll jump on it first. But yeah, no, I think Ken Revisa's book, Heads Up Baseball. We read it at University of Pacific, and that was a huge book that kind of changed my whole career. Honestly, my whole mindset. Like diving in on that book was huge. So that's a small investment for players at the youth level or any level for that matter. And it was just a huge tool. And just a quick story about how that kind of changed my career. When I was at UOP, I transferred there from a D3, and I was having some troubles in the fall just with my defensive work. And one of our coaches had come up to me one day, and he was like, "Hey, if you can't clean up your fielding, like you're not going to be able to make this club." And that had just gotten in my head. And so every time I was fielding ground balls, I was thinking like, oh, if I miss this ground ball, I'm not going to make the club. And so as you can kind of imagine, it's just a negative spiral. So, as reading this book, one of the tips that, that was in the book was visualization. And when I was with my dad fielding ground balls, like we would work out at Palo Alto High School and he'd hit me a whole bucket of ground balls. I'd miss none. And so I just would vision myself. I'd sit and visualize and be like, okay, so when my dad hits me ground balls, like I field them all cleanly. When coach hits me ground balls, I miss a ton. What's the difference? So then I just implemented in my practice environment, like back in college, a little bit of visualization. Okay, I just pretend my dad was hitting me ground balls, whether it was practice or a game or whatever. And I just visualized him hitting it. And I changed my mindset to ground balls or outs. And then I was able to, go and let my tools kind of shine through. But if I wasn't able to like make that switch and like that visualization of like positive reinforcement, like, I would have been that same guy just like beating his head against the wall, like trying to figure out why I couldn't it's not that I couldn't field ground balls. Like I have the skill set to field the ball. It's just that mental block. So anyway, the book just touches on a couple of different things like focal points, visualization, positive self-talk. So anyways, it gives you a lot of different tools to use that are going to help you combat like stuff that goes on in the season, some adversity, and just overall life lessons. I still use some of that stuff today.
Chris, any advice to that young player that's just looking to be confident on the field? Yeah,
I think Tyger nailed it. That was awesome. So I don't really want to add too much on that because I think that was really powerful. Something from Ken, that, and I know it can be cliche, but being comfortable, being uncomfortable, what we do is messy. We fail 7 out of 10 times and we're supposed to be good, so for me and talking with my guys, learning to take little wins and little victories every day, being able to, you moved a runner, we do something called going 2 for 6, and you don't even need to get a hit to go 2 for 6, but you help guys, you move a runner, you steal a base, you walk, you score a run, whatever it may be. of those 6 things, you know, you do that over the course of a week, over the course of a season, all the stuff's going to like play out. So I think that's a really big thing, is finding those small victories on a day. You know, it could be your decision making was spot on. I still went 0 for 4, but that's a good day. You know, so being able to have those takeaways when you do leave. And I know all of us, you know, we're obsessed with what we do. Being able to have an outlet, you know, I think I became a better player, and it took me until my first year in AAA to, good game or bad game, I had to sit there and process before I went home, so I could be a better boyfriend, I could be a better son to my parents, you know, instead of leaving pissed off, being frustrated, and then, you know, being sour the rest of the day. So, you know, being able to sit there, process, you know, maybe it takes 5 minutes, maybe, you know, telling my girlfriend like, hey, you know, I'll see you in 2 hours. That was a rough one, you know, like I'll walk home, or whatever it may be. You know, so that was a big thing. And then, like I said, having those outlets, being able to disconnect when you're at home, you know, it's like you leave work, you take your hat off, you go home, and you be home.
Well, Erik, I wanted just to briefly, if you kind of dive into the belt and, you know, the sheet that you have your coaches track over the course of the weekend, to kind of maybe the same version of that 6 that you use to kind of track like quality ABs and that, as far as the tournaments for the players.
Yeah, it's just something we've kind of used to try to, you know, make the players and the coaches and the parents more process orientated. And, you know, it's kind of a pain in the butt, but, you know, I'll print out a roster and laminate it with a whole bunch of different hitting categories. And those categories are definitely more process related things. I mean, you know, obviously hits are on there, but deep fly balls, moving along runners, you know, 8 pitch at bat, you know, things like that can kind of like Chris was saying, just kind of give them some wins in places maybe they aren't always looking for them. You know, something I always say to the kids, because you know, we have a lot of teams playing, and there's oftentimes I don't get to see them play. I'll say, hey, how'd you do this game? And I was 1 for 4. I go, well, you know, how was your base running? How was your defense? How was your pitching? You know, like were you a great teammate? I'll say that a lot. You know, so we're just trying to push that thought process of like, you know, you need to be a holistic player. You need to be good and solid in a whole bunch of different areas. It isn't about your batting average, you know, and same kind of thing. Like I said earlier, we all know that, you know, but communicating that and kind of creating a mindset in young players is a whole new challenge. So it's just, you know, so what we do is the coaches keep track of all that stuff. And at the end of the weekend, you know, that next practice the next week, we have the WWE belts from Target. And usually there's some candy involved. And even our high school guys, you know, you put a belt out there with some cookies for a 17-year-old high school junior, they'll fight each other, you know. So, you know, just some, like I said, it's kind of some quirky things to do just to kind of create engagement and buy-in.
Ryan, this is probably an area that, again, super pumped to have you as part of the staff and an expertise that you bring to the table, and something you've already started to implement with all the players that you work with. What are some of the go-to tools from a mental training standpoint that you like to utilize?
Yeah, I think, you know, the one that we always talk about, it's the first step, is where's your breath? Because at the end of the day, if you can control your breath, you can control your mind. The question for a lot of these kids is they don't really understand what that means. They think, oh, I can control my breath. They don't realize, like, I breathe every day. Like I'm supposed to control my breath. But when your times get tough and your heart starts racing a little bit, it's a lot tougher to control your breath. And I think that's one of those ones that I always just go back to, especially for the young guys, is just taking that big breath, refocusing, slowing yourself down. You know, Ken was a big one on the stoplights. I think the stoplights is a huge one for young kids to start to learn, and helping them to get a better understanding of when they're getting over emotional, overworked up, something where they can just find that center again, bring them back to that even. And I think that even is one of those ones where, you know, we've talked about it a lot with all these high school guys who have this thought process of I got to go and I have to make my next team. I have to get my next scholarship. It's always focusing on the next thing instead of being present in what you're doing currently. Understanding that this might be the tough time for you. You know, being in your current position might be tough, and that's where you have to kind of put the focus is being tough in that spot, learning from it, adapting to it, and trying to gain as much as you can in that time frame. You know, Chris mentioned the idea of 1% better. That's a huge moniker for me, and one of the ones that I've always practiced is every day I can try and get a little bit better, and trying to have all those snowball together to build something even bigger than just this one day. I think that just encompasses everything that we kind of talked about in this podcast, is that idea of there is time, but the time is limited, it's fleeting. So owning what you can today and doing as much as you possibly can is huge for your overall production.
Awesome. And I think that's the perfect way to kind of end and cap off this podcast. Tyger, if you want to, and Chris, I'll have you both, if you guys just want to kind of give, if players have questions, I know Tyger, there was a big one for you. If guys have things they want to ask you about, how can people reach you? Social media handles, whatever it may be, what you got to give that, and then we'll kind of close off the podcast.
I can be reached via Instagram or Twitter. Feel free to send a message either way. But yeah, Tyger Peterson. Happy to answer any kind of questions. I'm definitely want to be a resource, and especially during these times, I know, they're tough for a lot of different people, and if I can be a positive resource, I definitely would love to help. So reach out.
Same. Yeah, I'm always available. I don't have much social media. I do have a Twitter. So at Valaika is my Twitter handle. Go ahead, shoot me any messages or any questions, anything that you guys have. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So appreciate you guys having us on here.
No, I definitely want to thank you guys for your time. We've hit a ton of great talking points and crushed them. So again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DubBaseball, at ID3 Training, and at Ozella Baseball. Thanks for joining us on the Talking Points podcast. Until next time, keep developing.